Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are joining us from today for the 2020 Global Youth Economic Opportunity Summit live track event, Global Context Matters. We have nearly 300 participants joining us today, and we are so pleased to have you with us for our second in a series of virtual summit events between now and October 30th. It's hard to believe that we are now 6 months into the coronavirus pandemic, and this event has demonstrated the fragility of our social and economic systems, especially for the most vulnerable, including billions of young people around the world. Yet the crisis has also demonstrated the resilience, creativity, and leadership of young people, as well as organizations like you who are working to support them right now. All of us, development practitioners, funders, policymakers, and young people, are trying to make sense of this changing landscape, adapt to the immediate challenges, and predict the road ahead. In a typical year, the GYO Summit convenes over 4 days in the fall in Washington, D.C., and brings together nearly 500 youth experts and innovators from 75 countries. This year required a different approach, one that begins right now in the midst of the crisis that convenes expert and youth voices to better understand the current situation. We are using this year's summit events to elevate stories of partners who are collaborating in innovative ways and to help gather and share critical information, tools, and ideas under the summit theme, Reimagining Youth Economic Opportunities in a Post-Pandemic World. At the heart of this agenda are two key questions. What are the immediate impacts of COVID-19 on young people, and how have our organizations responded? And how can what we're learning now inform what we do next to build more resilient, inclusive systems for youth economic opportunity in a post-pandemic world, or at least one where we are better prepared for future shocks? I want to especially thank our summit sponsors for supporting this year's GYO Summit and these important online conversations. And if you'd like to join us as a summit partner this year, you can contact me at sarahs@makingsense.com or visit our website to learn more. The Global Context Matter track is one of 4 summit technical tracks. It typically explores cross-cutting issues like gender, conflict, migration, environment, health, and other factors that impact youth economic opportunities. As the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrates, young people are especially vulnerable to shocks, while long-time global trends like reduced bargaining power, economic insecurity, and an uncertain job landscape raise critical questions about widening inequality. At the same time, youth around the world are leading efforts to respond to the impact of COVID-19 in their communities, from tackling gender-based violence to the environment to combating misinformation and holding governments accountable. Under this track, we're exploring the following key questions. We have an opportunity to make youth engagement central to the post-COVID-19 response. How do we take advantage of that? What are some of the emerging trends, and what is the role of young people in a local, national, and global COVID-19 response? And how can we support young people's economic and social inclusion through youth engagement programs and policies now and as we rebuild in a post-COVID-19 world? We are very lucky to be joined by 3 speakers, including 2 young leaders representing different perspectives on these issues from South Africa, Mexico, and the United States. Joining us from South Africa, Asonele Kotu is a former Youth Lead ambassador and founder of the FemConnect app, which provides women access to self-administered contraceptives. She is focused on empowerment, online education, and networking experiences where young women can engage and collaborate through technology. Before venturing into her own business, she worked in roles where she was exposed to various skill sets ranging from PR, marketing, resource mobilization, digital marketing, and many other skills in various industries. Joining us from Mexico City, Gustavo Murillo currently works at Accountability Lab, a global nonprofit organization supporting active citizens, responsible leaders, and accountable institutions, and leads the Mexican Network for Public Service, a value-driven movement of young people in public service. He is a member of the International Republican Institute's Generation Democracy Network and the World Economic Forum's Global Shapers community. In 2019, he was recognized with a Youth Leadership Award at the Napoleon Victory Awards held by the Washington Academy of Political Arts and Sciences. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Michael McCabe is the Agency Youth Coordinator for USAID and brings over 28 years of professional experience managing international development programs. In his current role, he is responsible for helping integrate youth engagement and youth development issues across the agency, oversees the youth policy implementation, and serves as a senior representative on youth issues in the interagency and external community. And we are so pleased to be joined by all three of our speakers today. Before we dive in, I'm going to share a survey that our speakers helped put together. And we'll be organizing today's discussion around these questions. There is a link to the Padlet survey in the chat box on your screen. And we invite all of you to take just 3 minutes right now, before I turn it over to Mike, to start answering these questions, thinking through from your own perspectives, your own organizations, and the work that you're doing on the ground, how these questions connect and resonate with your experience these past 6 months. These are questions that, as I said, Mike will be sharing with our speakers this morning, but we also wanted to invite your input. All of your responses will be saved in the Padlet, and we'll be able to share this out with our community after the event. So we do invite you to take a moment. This will open up a new page in your browser, but we'll also be able to see your live responses on the screen here. Mike, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can kickstart things off.
Great. Thanks so much, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Welcome to all of you from around the world and for the continuation of the GYEOS dialogue series. As Sarah said, the global challenges that youth and partners have been responding to this past year are really of epic proportions. And we appreciate the numerous ways that each one of you have balanced your commitment to development, your communities, as well as to your families during these really challenging times. Again, I want to draw your attention to the Padlet link that's in the chat, and we really invite you throughout the session to put some of your thoughts to respond to these different issues. A wise person once said that the smartest person in the room is the room. And we want to draw out the collective wisdom of all of you as we go through the dialogue today, both in this session and in the breakout. So thank you for putting your thoughts in there. So to start off, as many of you experience daily, the global outlook on so many fronts is more challenging than we've seen in decades. And yet there's an opportunity for youth-led efforts to be central to the COVID and post-COVID response. The question isn't about getting back to where we were in March, but how we take advantage of this crisis to develop new approaches and solutions with youth and existing partners. And I want to be clear, effective community and global responses to COVID and the secondary impacts that are coming and already impacting us will not, the effective responses won't be possible or sustainable without young people's honest and full participation in these investments to try and tackle the issues of poverty, build resilient democratic societies, and improve health and nutrition outcomes or strengthen economies. So this is vital given the strategic development issues impacting youth, both prior to COVID and since. And I want to share with you 5 key trends that together influence the overall global youth well-being and economic opportunity landscape moving forward. First, as I think we're all clear on, we're facing a health crisis unprecedented in scale. And there's a role for youth and positive youth development in ensuring health, humanitarian, and nutritional needs are met. The stress on the health systems from over 20 million cases of COVID is exacerbating other diseases as well. And so millions of people are now vulnerable to dying from insufficient maternal and child health issues, lack of preventive treatment services, and outbreaks of vaccine preventable diseases. But in particular for young people and how it even impacts their economic opportunity. Prior to the pandemic, mental health with young people was the leading cause of disability and the second leading cause of death for adolescents in many countries around the world. And now the WHO reports that mental health rates are at the highest rate in history. So we have to build mental health and psychosocial support in appropriate ways into our development work and into our economic opportunity designs. There's also a massive opportunity for rebuilding our health systems and for how young people are human resources for health, such as tracers, health educators, and others. A second trend is the devastating impact on households and their resilience. Again, there's a clear role for youth and positive youth development in addressing the food insecurity, poverty, education, and income or employment options. The unprecedented loss or sudden loss of jobs and livelihoods is aggravated by the humanitarian emergencies that we're seeing in terms of food insecurity, water insecurity, education gaps, and others. So these historic pre-crisis highs on global humanitarian needs have been even more exacerbated and outstripped by the global response efforts that are going on. So new needs are likely to be concentrated in these existing crisis contexts. But at the same time, we know that right now there's more than 113 million people who are projected to face crisis level food insecurity this year, and 25% more than expected prior to the pandemic. So we're seeing a significant increase. There's also an additional 148 million people who are expected to backslide into extreme poverty over the coming year, absent any interventions or pushing new ideas out there. So that would put the total population in extreme poverty at about 880 million. And Africa will be hardest hit with about 80 million likely to fall below the international poverty line in there. In particular on education, prior to COVID, we had 20% of young people in the developing world not in school and not in training. Now we see 1.6 billion, and at one point we had 91% of young people out of learning that are just not in school right now. And as we start to prepare for how do we ensure that there is that continuation of education, we need to be really creative in distance learning and other means. And that goes for vocational training, higher ed, as well as basic ed. We also know from recent research that a lot of young people may not return, needing to support their families for the income insecurity. I'll go through the other three trends really quickly. One, the third global trend is around the severe shocks to mobility in the economy. And this is particularly linked to the work of GYEOS and the approaches that we're trying to promote for youth economic security. The IMF projects that we'll lose about 5% of our GDP worldwide this year. And disproportionately, that's going to affect vulnerable communities. We know that prior to COVID, 5 million new jobs were needed monthly to keep youth unemployment at its current rate, about twice the adult unemployment rate. That rate is now almost at 3 times the rate of the general population in a number of countries, as young people are often the last hired and first fired, as we see. Fourth, we'll have to look at this trend of what's impacting peace and security concerns coming out of this, because there's a unique, complex problem set that we're dealing with, as I mentioned, on extreme poverty, food insecurity, growing inequality, but also rising authoritarianism. And that's even more exacerbated in fragile states. So out of work, out of school youth feel even more marginalized, are more susceptible to being recruited into illicit activities for their own survival or out of frustration. Most of them want to be engaged in constructive ways, as we saw in a recent ILO survey that found in a number of countries up to 65% of youth reported having helped with the dissemination campaigns related to COVID. But we also recognize that there's big challenges in terms of misinformation and disinformation that's been expanding dramatically during COVID, as well as fragility and violence, where we see young people at almost half of the total of homicides going on in many countries. Together, these issues in fragility make YEO programming more complex to design and implement without a good sense of adaptive management. Finally, the fifth trend is linked to the rising pressures on governance and democracy and stability, and that affects the policies around youth economic opportunities that we need to try and tackle. Government and citizen responses to COVID-19 are disrupting democratic practices and weakening democratic development, and restrictions on assembly and expression and postponement of elections are creating more instability in a number of these places. And with 65% of the population being under the age of 35, but only 6% of political representatives being in that age range, young people are increasingly feeling marginalized and disenfranchised. And we need to look at how all of these pieces fit together. So in sum, the secondary impacts of COVID are going to have significant implications for how donors and partners envision, design, and implement any of our priorities together. And YEO activities will need to take into account the drivers behind these trends if we hope to have success moving forward in the coming few years. Gustavo?
Yes, thank you. Mike, Well, young people have expressed the greatest concern about the impact of COVID-19 on mental health. Um, Actually, first off, let me say thank you, Sarah, and everyone for making this possible, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, sharing. Thank you, Mike and Asonele. Um, as a part of my work, I will say that the two biggest issues I noticed were first related to youth unemployment and social security. Um, Before the pandemic began, most young people in Latin America already live in precarious working conditions, subject to low wages, to few benefits, and normally. And this is interesting, and I don't know if it also happens a lot in your countries, but young people in Latin America and Mexico have contracts under outsourcing systems, which of course we know that these systems provide poor working conditions for whoever is employed under it. We already knew of this, but we never cared so much about it. Like we never gave it the importance that it deserved. I mean, not us out here in this conversation, but our governments probably. Um, but now this pandemic made it more evident. So around the world, I will say that young people already had higher level of unemployment before this health crisis, and now they were the first people who were hit during this pandemic. For example, in Mexico, 70% of Mexicans who have lost their jobs are under the age of 29. So this is a huge new problem for this sector, and of course, most of them were under an outsourcing system, as I mentioned before. And another big thing is the access to internet. Mike already mentioned this big trend of the internet. And in Mexico, 30% of the population do not have access to internet at all. And it's even worse if we just consider the rural communities, who half of them do not have Wi-Fi at home. So it's like 50%. And it's the same trend for the rest of Latin America. And basically, we have a huge number of population disconnected from the world, like from the new normal, from the digital revolution. And this is evident when we see data from, let's say, the education sector. For instance, despite all the flexibility and all the commitment shown by many schools and teachers in securing educational continuity, uh, despite those school closures, not all the students have been able to actually continue online education, as Mike mentioned too. Actually, there's one study from OECD which demonstrates that although most countries put in place alternative learning opportunities, just half of the total students were able to continue online education. So I would say that these are two the biggest impact. I mean, there's many more like mental health disruption to education, income loss, but I would say that in my work, this is what we must notice.
Thanks.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
I think we lost you there, Mike, for a second, but Asonele, go ahead. I think you were next.
Oh, okay, I think I lost him as well. I thought I was the one that couldn't hear anything. Hi, everyone. My name is Asonele. I am from South Africa, and I used to be youth lead ambassador for South Africa, and I also run a business called FemConnect, which is focused on sexual reproductive health care using technology. And on the topic of how COVID has impacted youth, is we have realized in South Africa, after 5 months of being under lockdown, we are now slowly being let out into the world again. We've seen a lot of challenges arising from legacy challenges that we've had before. So if you look at the backdrop of South Africa, we already have an over 40% high employment rate between in a youth gap, which is people between the ages of 15 and 34. And that is what we started with before COVID. and those problems has escalated because now everything was under lockdown. Jobs were retrenching people, companies were closing down, and that has had a bigger effect on the rising numbers of youth that is unemployed in South Africa. So apart from that, with businesses closing down, we've realized that most of the major economic contributing industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, um, um, tourism, retail were largely affected because of how everything was put on hold. And with this in place, there were no other alternative solutions for people to resume businesses because there will be a time where we have to implement solutions that will help us mitigate instances where if we are not able to see face to face, how will business continue? So there's been a very, very sad moment for smaller businesses where they have had to close down because they were not geared up for the impact of what the pandemic has brought to us. There were businesses that had to close down due to financial constraints because they couldn't pay people. There were people that have lost jobs because their companies had to downsize to keep the company going. So those problems have a ripple effect, not just for the business itself, but it affects our communities, it affects our homes, it affects people's livelihoods, and it trickles down to other challenges such as accessibility to healthcare, because we also saw that our healthcare systems were vulnerable before the coronavirus, and now it has been even more. We have to sit up and look and say, what can we do to improve the situation with more young girls getting pregnant, people not being able to get sanitary pads because they don't, they
We're
they
breaking up
depended
just
on
a little bit, Asonele.
donations that come through the school systems. So close, children are not going to school. So they have better now. Okay, is it
Yeah.
better now?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So those kind of things have affected so many things. So it's the economic part that has been disrupted. It is the health system part that has been disrupted. And there's the educational component that is also being disrupted, because you find that in the 5 months that have been in lockdown, schools have been closed. And schooling has to continue even though children are not allowed to go to school. So what sort of learners of our school from various grades, and the teachers will send you the working material and so forth. But what we found is that this option is not convenient for every single parent, because not every single one has internet connection. You have remote disadvantaged and rural locations where they don't even have a Wi-Fi connectivity or internet connectivity for the community. So it becomes a problem when you're sending a child to school and the school suddenly says this child has to have a computer at home, they have to have a laptop, to have internet connection. Meanwhile, you have to weigh getting a laptop and internet. I don't have work, and the little bit that I have, families struggling with having to deal with the fact that children have to learn from home because they don't have the necessary resources that are put in place. They don't have the necessary infrastructure. And the other component, which I am very passionate about, is the part of accessibility to sexual and reproductive health care. Because we've found that even though that many pregnancy cases have been recorded during the time of COVID-19, there has been a
You're breaking up again a little bit.
gap of girls who depended on the school. Oh, this internet. Is it better now?
It's better, thank you.
Okay. So I think it might be the video or something.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I was saying is that we've realized that the girls that usually depend on the donations that come through schools are not able to get those sanitary pads donation because they're not going to school. And NGOs and everybody else is working out there, but it's difficult to get to the communities if you do not have the digital means to relay your communication. So what we've noticed is that there's a huge need for infrastructure for technology, because that's where everything is moving to. And if we want to reach everybody equally, from the lowest, from the most rural communities to every single person, we have to adapt how we communicate and our systems so that so that people are able to get the information. And in the next coming months, I think that many of us should look at what can be done around education and around health and around how we can provide opportunities or provide platforms that we can bridge the unemployment gap that we have within the youth group in South Africa. And I'm glad that my internet didn't stop now. That's all from us.
Thank you so much, Asonele. We appreciate
Infrastructure problem.
we're we're
This is the
6 months
problem.
in, but we're all still struggling with certain glitches in our system. So we appreciate the flexibility, and I think that's as we think about the changing context, it's about being flexible with these technological changes and adaptations we're doing. So I also want to thank everyone who has been commenting on the Padlet. There's been some really good insights there as well, talking about the interface between education, economic opportunity, and health issues, and how we take much more of a system-wide coordinated approach to support young people and engage young people. And I think, Asonele, you were talking a little bit more about like how we're looking at that local system as we design new activities. Gustavo, can you talk a little bit more about what should be done in terms of efforts to mitigate the impact on young people and to engage them as authentic partners in this? Too often, I think we see that people talk about youth in this area as either a problem because of the COVID spread or as a secondary thought. And there's obvious, as we've all just mentioned, a lot of secondary impacts which will disproportionately impact young people. What are you seeing in Mexico that we can do to mitigate the impact and really engage them effectively as partners?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. Thank you. Well, before we try to engage young people, we have to first provide them the means to do so, right? Like we were talking about how the limited access to internet. I see some in the comments that it's even, he says, Robinson saying that it's even worse in rural communities in Africa with limited or no access to internet at all. And it's the same thing mostly around the world, or at least in the developing world for young people. So first thing is like governments must ensure that young people have the short and long-term security, like access to essential basic services now and once the pandemic is I wouldn't say over, but more control at least. So this means one provided its affiliation to Social Security. It's like in the middle of the crisis, of a health crisis, it's unbelievable that millions of young people do not have access to Social Security, to health services. Like, how is this possible, you know? So we need to make sure that if another pandemic hits in the future, we are better prepared this time. Then if we want to prepare, if we want to engage young people as partners, we need to be more inclusive and support most of them, like the most vulnerable to economic losses, as you mentioned in your chain before, that there is some specific people that are suffering even more. So we need to try to be inclusive and reach them to them. The world basically turned digital, and we cannot leave anyone behind. We now have to see internet basically as a basic right, as a service that governments need to provide to those who cannot afford it. Let's reach everyone. So it's not always the same groups of people who have good Wi-Fi and know each other. Like we are so privileged to be able to be here, but many of them cannot. So that has to be a first step. And we just shouldn't see the provision of internet as a way to stay connected to social media, but as a mean to stay economically active, for example, to be able to provide goods or services online if you're an entrepreneur, to stay engaged, informed in school, in education. It's like everything is virtual now. And at the beginning of the pandemic, in Accountability Lab, we found out that many young people, including our own volunteers and workers, did not have access to internet at home. So in this sense, we developed an initiative called Oxygen 2030, where basically we realized that we need to do a few steps. So Basically, we not only provide free data mobile chips to those who were in need, but we also provided some educational material for them to develop the skills, the knowledge, and anything that they needed to whatever they needed. In this case, to stay economically active, let's say, to start a small business online, or even just to have better chances when looking for a job online. So I think that this is what needs to be done at the bigger scale, the bigger efforts with governments, basically help young people develop important skills required by the private sector and help them reach their full potential. Um, I will say that we need to encourage more creative approaches to work online, but also offline, and work with unlikely networks. With unlikely networks is something that we do a lot in the Accountability Lab. We try to reach to those people who normally are not part of the conversation, who don't maybe are not politically active, but that they are leaders in the community, that they can help others, that I don't know, like they just let's just get out the box and think of new ways to reach to everyone, and to reach as many young people as possible. So I would say that a bigger scale we need to do this. Like we need to have some partnerships that helps us young people to empower young people with the skills and knowledge, to stay active in this digital world.
Good. Thank you so much. Asonele, moving to the South Africa context, what do you see local or national governments doing, and what is your organization doing to really kind of respond to the efforts to mitigate this impact on youth unemployment and the related secondary impacts? And what is being done to authentically engage young people as partners in the response there?
I
Asonele,
forgot. I forgot I muted myself. Okay, from a South African perspective, I would say that what our government has done is they have been some kind of funding that has been allocated specifically to help small businesses, and during this time of the pandemic. But what has happened with all these different funds that have been set up, it catered to specific businesses that were legally registered, that were registered with certain industry bodies and so forth, but it left out a large portion of township-based community businesses. And these are businesses like your spaza shops. These are the mothers that sell fruit and veg on the side of the road. These are the people that sell stuff in townships for the townships. And those businesses, most of the time, are not registered on the system. So there has been a problem in terms of those businesses not being able to tap into the financial support that the government has made available for small businesses and for youth-led businesses in South Africa. Secondly, I feel that there needs to be more of a youth inclusion in terms of the decisions that are taken around policies and around how to develop the economy of South Africa, because there's a strong need of a youth voice that is needed there. And that is something that we're not yet there as a country. I hope that at the long run, we will be there, or in the near future, we will be there. Our president has indicated that there will be a focus in terms of supporting small businesses that are specifically youth-led and women-led in South Africa. And those are the things
we
that
might need to put
the
you
government
back
is
on voice
proposing.
only.
Of government support.
There you go. Thanks.
Okay, is that better now?
Yes.
What? Okay. An additional thing that has been done is that the government has also increased grants that they give, social grants that they give to people. So during the pandemic, there was an increase that everybody received. And this was also for unemployed youth that are mothers that take care of their children. And they could claim this money from the government in order to help them with their daily living on a daily basis. But what I think needs to be done going forward, there needs to be a huge focus on investing in youth-driven initiatives, youth-led businesses, and also technology that is meant to advance the different industries that are struggling because of the impact of COVID-19. And what we have done as an organization, as FemConnect, is we've been making a noise for 2-3 years saying we need a solution where women can get access to sexual and reproductive health online, and nobody was listening to us, and they were like, we don't need that, we don't need that. And then COVID came and everyone was like, actually, we do need that. So we've realized that there is a need to digitize many processes, especially when it comes to taking care of women's health. And what we do as an organization, we use our technology to help young girls request sanitary pads online. And it's a donor matchmaking platform where you, as Mike, can say, I would like to donate sanitary pads to a girl living in Cape Town, South Africa. And then on our side, we would have a girl called Asonele staying in a township in Kailicha who will log onto the FemConnect platform and say, I'm in need of sanitary pad support. And then we would do the match, and then we would then deliver to the beneficiary. But apart from that, what we also do is that we've realized that there's a need for easier access to contraceptives. And that is a big problem that we've had. And that's an ongoing problem that comes from ages ago. Women sometimes tend to struggle to access contraceptives in South Africa. And that is because there are two different pathways to getting contraceptives. You can either get them through the public facilities where you go to a government, clinic, you meet a family planning sister or a nurse, and they give you your contraceptives. Or you can go to a private doctor and buy your contraceptives from a pharmacist. So what we're trying to do is to say there shouldn't be two separate routes for the rich and the poor. There should be one platform where everybody can log in and say, I'm in need of contraceptives, and they can choose and they can get educated on that platform. And whilst they're choosing their contraceptives, they can adopt a sister where they can say, I would like to donate to a young girl that is staying in a disadvantaged community who does not have access. So that is the kind of impact that we want to have through our technology, because there's usually a lot of stigma and taboo that is attached to contraceptive access or sexual and reproductive health. There's usually a lot of education that needs to be done. And we need to take it further to a level whereby people do not have to struggle to get access to women's health. That is something that should be as easy as ordering food online. And that is what we're trying to do as FemConnect on our side. So looking at the different levels of how things have actually been, of how things have unfolded and how the challenges have become bigger problems, we now have to sit up as youth and say, what are the solutions that we are bringing forward? And how do we then mitigate, or how do we bring solutions to speak to these problems instead of just sitting back and complaining and saying, the government is not doing this person is not doing that. It's about time that we as youth stand up and say, these are the solutions that we want, and we ask you to include us on policies and rolling out in this world, so that, because we've got such amazing ideas, but we just want to be included in the conversations. And that I think should be the way forward, because youth is not included in these decisions or in these policies. I
Wow.
think I'm talking too much now.
No, that was wonderful. I love the example of what you've done with the platform, and how you've really made a digital platform work for people. But more importantly, what you just said, that too often, sometimes we get in a mindset that we have to sit back and wait for a program to come into our community. And what we've really seen through this pandemic and crisis is young people looking for ways to solve issues on their own, and obviously looking for ways that we do that in partnership between government, private sector, community groups, and youth-led groups. And so that's been also for USAID one of the things that we've really been looking at across the past 6 months. One, we launched a new digital strategy for the agency. And this digital strategy is really remaking the way we look at every part of the development cycle, and what the role is of digital literacy, of digital jobs, of misinformation, disinformation, and making sure that we give people the tools to deal with that, um, looking at all across the digital skills spectrum. So that's one big part. The second thing that we heard was young people want to be taking action. They're looking for some additional mentoring or network or seed capital. And we've really been trying to support that in a couple of ways. One, as you well know, through being part of the Youth Lead Network at youthlead.org, we've got thousands of young people who have been sharing the ways that they've been designing new approaches to not only entrepreneurship and employment response, but the COVID response looking at health issues, mental health issues, and at civic political engagement. So networking that way has been important. The second thing that USAID has been trying to support is we just launched our new Global Leadership and Education for Advancing Development, or better known as Global Lead Initiative, which is an agency-wide effort to really increase our support to our missions, to our partners, and to young leaders to create a continuum of civic education, civic engagement, and leadership development. We've been seeing around the world a growing interest that we want to expand the tools that young people have in how they take action at a local or a national level. So our missions are supporting Global Lead by expanding and highlighting current civic leadership activities, as well as funding and designing new ones that are integrating across sectors, whether that's in the education and employment sector, the health sector, or democracy and governance. We also just launched, as part of this response, Youth Excel, which is an innovative implementation research initiative to support youth-led organizations doing this type of program research that includes a focus on entrepreneurship, employment, education, or on any topic, including we are looking forward to doing research on issues like youth peace and security as well. So that's important because for a first time, we're really putting money in behind youth-led research that's going on in a number of countries. And this builds on a lot of USAID's work to empower youth. In 2019 alone, we trained and supported over 320,000 young people with improved job skills and soft skills and social emotional leadership skills. And we're also supporting, obviously, the partners through the increasing programmatic tools that we're finding that you can find on youthpower.org and the communities of practice linked to that. I just wanted to share one really great example of a colleague who's been a part of the Youth Lead platform, for example, and has been working with USAID on youth peace and security. But in March, he took his name is Achaleke Christian Leki from Cameroon. He's a member of Youth Lead, but he took his organization called Local Youth Corner Cameroon and launched something called We Connect when the COVID-19 started. And this youth-led COVID-19 trauma and counseling call center has been working to provide free psychosocial counseling to young people and all victims of stress and anxiety across the board. They also created a whole program to produce and disseminate hand sanitizers and masks to vulnerable populations throughout communities in Cameroon. And they've distributed over 50,000 bottles of hand sanitizer and mobilized over 1,500 young people that in their communities, they're leading COVID-19 response. And just yesterday, he was awarded as the best COVID response program in all of Cameroon by the UN system and by the government. And so these are examples of how young people are saying, you know what, we can't wait for someone to come to us with the opportunity. We're taking advantage of this opportunity. We're networking with each other through different platforms, like you've mentioned, Asonele, and in Mexico, what's going on. But we all want to be figuring out how we better network these systems at the local level so that they're sustainable and that they're growing. And that, again, it's not getting back to where we were. It's getting to a different place based on the new opportunities and the new technology that's coming out at a local and a global level. So I also want to acknowledge there's some really great comments again on the Padlet of people talking about these alliances for collective impact and how we design those effectively. And I also want to expand, Asonele, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit now about how we support young people's economic and social inclusion through youth engagement policies in the new normal. And as we rebuild in the post-COVID world, what does that look like? So what is it that we need to be focusing on in terms of new programs and policies?
You know what I've learned, Mike, and I gave myself a task to unlearn what I know during this month that I was in COVID-19. I was like, okay, scrape what you know, start from scratch and relearn new habits. And what I realized is that there are so many young people out there that are trying to do so many things, but some
We
the
might need to go back to just
isn't
voice only.
there,
Sorry.
the resources as to how do you start or how do okay, there you go.
Thanks.
So I've realized that there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of youth networks out there. There's a lot that is being put out there, but the problem is the connection between the person who's supposed to be getting this information is just not there. And I've asked myself several times, and I've said, okay, I made it my personal task to actually go out there and look for networks where I can benefit something from. But I feel that we need to do more of that. We need to be kind of in your face and say, this is what you need, this is where you can join, or this is the network that you can be part of if you know that you are a young entrepreneur that is trying to do something. This is where you can get resources if you need information about the industry that you're working on. And a lot of that is out the internet. It's not towards the people that need the information. So what I feel that should be done going forward is that we need to continue the work that we are doing as youth networks to to continue educating people, to continue putting out the resources there, to continue collaborating, because what I've learned is that there is so much power in collaborating, and what you see happening in South Africa might be the same as somebody like Gustavo in Mexico. And speaking to Gustavo, I can then exchange ideas and I can see what has worked in his country and what has worked in my country. The fact that we are living in silos and we are working in silos is not going to work for us. It is about time that everybody and every single stakeholders needs to be part of this going forward agenda. And the going forward agenda is bringing government, private, youth-led organizations or private companies, putting all the ideas in one place and saying, this is what we have. This is the expertise that is around us. How can we build on that? And so far, youth development has reaped many good benefits in certain places, but we just need to keep doing the good work that we're doing, and we just need to amplify it and just make sure that we increase the channels of how that information is disseminated, increase the channels of how the communications from top to bottom and bottom to top flows, because I kind of feel that we need to streamline the communication from the end user, where the end user says, I need this. And we need to look at what the policy or what is the process that is being put in place. And those two places need to communicate, because at the end of the day, you cannot create something for me without having input from my side. It needs to be a conversation between me and you. So inclusion is very important. Dialogue is very important. Constant collaboration and communication is important. Having data, that is another thing that we don't have. We need to start recording the impact of all these youth development initiatives that we are doing, because we're not doing enough of that. Therefore, we end up doing activation after activation, initiative after initiative, but we don't track what have we actually gotten out of this. Yep. But by tracking that, we can be able to say, I have achieved X, therefore I need to build up on this part, or I need to improve, or I need to stop doing that. There needs to be proper ways of measuring impact of the initiatives that we are doing towards youth development. And I cannot stress enough about youth inclusion. I think that is the way forward. Include youth. Youth have brilliant ideas. Yeah. So that is it from
Thank you. Thanks.
Include us, please.
And I think sometimes people get stuck there because they're like, yes, we need to include youth. Yes, we need to like support the empowerment of youth. But it's looking at that next layer down. What are those barriers to adequate inclusion, and what policies and programs can really allow that to happen? And Gustavo, tell us a little bit how you're doing that in Mexico, and either through your work or other work that's going on in Mexico around policies that really effectively are expanding economic inclusion.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Well, I think that it's all about cooperation and partnerships. This is a huge thing, it's a huge problem, and I don't think like nobody will be able to do anything so successful alone. I think now is a great opportunity because many governments will adapt their national economic plans, um, and this provides a large window for the opportunity for decision makers to integrate a stronger focus on young people and future generations in government actions and have a seat at the table. So we have to engage young people in the design and implementation of policy responses and recovery plans. Mostly we are trying to encourage and support an open response. So this means that listening to and including the insights from minorities, people with disabilities, as we know that young people live many realities, and we need to include them all in this policy response. So we are now pushing for an for an what we call an open response. Numerous governments have promoted digital initiatives to engage young citizens in the government's COVID-19 response and recovery efforts, but we also need to encourage more offline activities. As I mentioned many times, but it's so essential to reach to those communities that are without internet right now. So we have to either update or develop new national youth strategies, which we are also pushing for in collaboration with, and this is really important, like in collaboration with youth stakeholders to translate all those political commitments to action programs. So if existing, these strategies need to be leveraged to mobilize resources and design target problems for programs for young people, and especially for those most vulnerable youth populations, including, of course, young people not in employment, education, or training, and young migrants, homeless youth, and young women. And also giving response to a comment asking like the role of businesses in this to tackle youth. I think that it's highly essential. Like public-private partnerships will be fundamental for this, specifically to tackle youth unemployment. Um, Previous economic shocks have illustrated that young people, um, like let's say graduating in times of crisis, will find it more difficult to get a decent job and incomes. So this might represent a problem for many people right now, and we need to support young people in developing their skills, as I mentioned before, in getting professional experience in and we can only do so with public-private partnerships that give young people access to foreign employment. And here in Mexico, we were, I think that I will say lucky, maybe, because I think at least we have the program, even though it's not been that successful, let's say. But we have a program, a government program called Youth Building the Future, which was launched about like a year ago, I will say. And basically, there were these huge partnerships between government and private sector to employ young people, specifically needs. I think that this is highly important. We need the private sector and the government to cooperate more, to come together, to try to develop these type of initiatives. It was huge here in Mexico. I actually don't remember the number of young people that were employed by this program, but this might be a good example for many countries out there to try to. I think that cooperation will be just essential. And finally, I will say that we need to support and encourage youth networks and organizations. New Zealand and many other countries have established a network with major youth organizations to strengthen collaboration for responding to COVID-19 more effectively. Also, youth workers have also continued to provide support to vulnerable youth in innovative ways and mostly digital. And here this for specifically for donors, this is for USA too. I think that international organizations and donors need to support youth-led organizations. Like normally we have seen that donors are afraid to fund young people. Like, I mean, it's understandable because maybe they probably lack the capacity, the experience, or just the formality to manage a grant. And I have faced it myself in the past, but I think that it needs to change. We need to trust young people more, because at least maybe some small grants should be now go directly towards young people instead of going with senior experts, because we know better. Like, we know what young people needs. We know what are our demands. So we shouldn't just be seen as like secondary actors who benefit from grants, but actually we, we should be trusted more as young people, have many ideas, have many innovative ideas, and I think that we need to give some more um, seat for young people.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I similarly, at USAID, as we're taking a look at this as the opportunities of what policies can we impact to reignite economic growth in countries. There are specific things we're taking a look at that are impacting on the youth economic opportunity side. So the use of rapid labor market assessments of COVID-19 impacts to really identify potential strategies for recovery, I think is something that we're starting to see in some countries. And how do we make sure that those are based on kind of the trend lines we're seeing, and what may be happening, for example, on transitions going on in gig economy or digital jobs. Similarly, strategies that support access to finance and safe market access for young people has been another thing that we've been looking at in certain parts of, for example, in some of our missions in Africa, to really make sure that we're looking at digital finance and other financial services and ensuring that access, because we're finding that whether it's that credit access at this key moment or cash transfers to meet immediate economic needs are going to have to be there to make the transition. And one of those areas that's being done increasingly are models of public works that could be looked at to help bridge the severe economic crisis that a number of communities are facing right now. The other thing, going back to what both of you just said about the digital side, is really, and the comments are coming in also on the Padlet on this, is how do we ensure quality digital access? We're talking a lot about, for example, USAID has put together a whole compendium of the global resources on digital distance education, but also making sure that that access is spread evenly and to that last mile of a community, so that people have the access, and with particular emphasis on ensuring that female youth have the benefit and access to that. Another area that we've been seeing where investments for really developing policies and programming in that future of work was identified recently by the Alliance for International Youth Development, which had submitted a paper to USAID for how they're looking at this issue of really responding to the secondary impacts of COVID. And again, they've been prioritizing how we look at digital skills and soft skills and improving the infrastructure for digital access. But I know that, for example, in Sri Lanka, with our ULEAD activity there, we've been investing a lot in what we call the Stay Home and Learn campaign, which, while so many young people were at home, um, the entire project there pivoted to allow for over 1 million young people to access curated online skills development content. And it kicked off with a whole short film called Diving in the Sky, which engaged over 700,000 young people initially to really understand how to use these digital platforms and career guidance as they're continuing their work. Similarly, in Vietnam, we have a partnership with the private sector, with Novartis, as well as through our improving access and curriculum to teaching medical information, so Impact Med. And we've been training up and pivoting on what we've been working on with the medical schools across the country and with young people. And by mobilizing these new approaches to the private sector's role and universities' role in these communities where we were working, they broke and have now had 99 days without any new local transmissions there. So there's some really innovative ways. And again, AIYD has identified other really important areas of how we're helping young people navigate the changes in the future of work around freelance and gig economy. And what does that look like? And how do we make sure the gig economy is recognizing that the multiple needs that a person has? Obviously, it's good for getting that job, but we also want to make sure that the other security and support that comes with having a livelihood is built into that. Lastly, just looking at um, in the expansion of digital jobs and medium and small enterprises, what we can do to really improve around subsidies and cash grants and value chain support will be really key for where we move in the youth economic opportunity space in the coming 12 months, because we recognize not only are the income insecurity numbers and poverty backsliding higher, but it's particularly higher for young people and young women. So we're really trying to look at that in our analysis of all of our new programming to try and address this in the short and then into the long term. I want to go for a moment to the few minutes we have left to address some of the questions that are coming in on the Padlet. So I want to open it up to Gustavo and Asonele to respond to this. One of the questions is what do we need to do to really meaningfully improve access to internet for youth who have been impacted by COVID? Can you guys give us an example of where you see internet being expanded or appropriate technology to really allow young people to take full advantage of both the economic opportunity, but also just the skills and learning opportunity? Gustavo?
Yes, and first, I wanted to, if it's possible, to respond really quickly to Justin from Cameroon. He actually asked something similar, like how can you include the rural and educated youth that have no access to internet? So for now, I think that we're trying to first. Justin, thank you for the question. We have a program in the Contraceptives lab called Citizen Help Desk, where basically we try to collect critical information from hundreds of communities to solve daily problems for citizens and try to close the loop on challenges of any type. So this program was really successful now during the pandemic, because basically we are an intermediary between young people and like any citizens in rural communities who could not have access to internet, and governments and government authorities. So basically, we are trying to basically just like in many senses like try to uh, like beating mistrust. And basically, what we try to do is to validate information and use trust sources to inform our decision making. So this is one way we are working right now. We have these citizen help desks that are basically based in rural communities where people don't have access to internet. So you can just go to this citizen help desk, and actually, if you have any question and doubt, you want to reach your government, you have any petition, basically you can come to our help desk, and we try to provide it. So basically, we relaunched now this initiative during the pandemic, and it's called Civic Acts. So basically, this is what we have been doing. In terms of the like digital technology in general, I would say that it's mostly in these two, right? In trying to get the inputs from young people and from people without internet. I think 3 minutes now, Sarah. So and basically just to try to empower young people to stay economically active. So something related to how we can keep young people connected to the economic world and to the educational world. And I'm just gonna give the word to Asonele so she can have some minutes. Thank you.
Thanks. Asonele?
Um, so what I think Gustavo has mentioned most of the stuff that needs to be done, but from a South African context, I think that we need to invest more in terms of infrastructure as to how infrastructure for internet access, because many disadvantaged communities do not have access to internet, and our government and everybody else that is in that area needs to make that possible, because at the end of the day, if we look at the way forward and how things are turning, everything is becoming digital. So internet is now becoming a necessity, it's a commodity, and data is also becoming a necessity. And even when you look at the usage of mobile phone users, and that was a research that we did before we implemented our sexual and reproductive health mobile app. We wanted to look at how many people are using mobile apps in South Africa. And it's over 70% of people that are on mobile apps every single time. So if a person has a phone, it just doesn't have to be internet connectivity through going to a website or anything. We can integrate stuff like WhatsApp chats or SMS, you know, those kind of things. As long as a person has a mobile phone, we need to find ways as to how do we infiltrate that mobile phone and send that information to that person. And that is what we need to start looking at, because that is the way forward. That is how industries are going to change, and that is how businesses and processes are going to be. We've been talking about the fourth industrial revolution for months now, and I think COVID-19 has kind of arrived and said, you guys have been talking too much, it's time to act now. And it's time for us to act and implement all those digital solutions, because we've been saying for IR for years, and now is the time to actually implement. So a lot of investment, specifically in Africa and in South Africa, needs to be done in terms of getting communities, low and middle income communities, ready for the digital age, because there's a huge divide. And if we're going to say we're going forward with the digital aspect of how we do things and digital processes, then we're leaving out a lot of people if we do not give them the infrastructure. And it is important for us to first start with giving them the right infrastructure they need to be part of this digital society that we want to build going forward. Because currently the digital society is very divided. The poor are not tapping into the digital society, but those that can afford are tapping into the digital society. And what we need to look at is how do we create equal systems that are not about being poor or not about being rich. It is about systems that work for every single human being that is living in a country, in the world, or wherever. So I would say internet, technology, get the people ready, get the most rural, remote areas ready for this kind of information, because this is the way forward. And governments will have to just put on their best suits and just get it up and running, so that people in the most, because you know what, we do work that impacts people, and the people that gets to tap into the what to the gist of the work that we're doing are people in the most rural communities. Therefore, we have to make the necessary infrastructure and the necessary changes available so that they can be able to tap into the technology age that we're stepping into, because that's what we're going into. And
Asonele, thank you
yeah.
so much for such a wonderful, articulate conclusion to this. And Gustavo, thank you for the concrete examples from the context of Mexico. And I think, as Asonele said, definitely the COVID context and pandemic has forced the issue and moved us forward in so many ways at understanding the role that digital technology and opportunity will play in the future on education, on employment, on governance, on finance. And that's important. But at the same time, we are trying to make sure that we leave no one behind. And so part of all of our policies has to be, how do we ensure that these digital skills, these financial literacy skills, these other components are extended out broadly to those with access and without access. We look forward to an ongoing dialogue through the breakout sessions now, and I pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Gustavo, Asonele, and Mike. This has been a great, wide-ranging conversation. I think you've touched on some major themes around youth inclusion and linking kind of the ideas of engaging youth in policy into the mechanics of how we actually do that. I want to thank everyone as well for attending today. We have more of these events coming up over the next couple of months. There's a calendar here on the screen for the next track events, including a special event with one of our sponsors, Summit sponsors, FHI 360, on a specific impact industry that's been impacted by COVID-19. So we would love to have you join us for these events, and we will be sharing registration opportunities. You can also visit youtheosummit.org, our summit website, to learn more about the agenda and follow us online. If you're interested in contributing content, you can contact my colleague Cole Simcoe or if you're interested in partnering with us to support this event and ongoing learning around youth economic opportunity and the impacts of COVID-19, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much again to our speakers. We're so grateful to have your time. So we're going to transition now to breakouts. In the chat box on the bottom right of your screen, I have shared a link to a Google Doc. You will have also received these links in an email when you registered. So you should have that in your inbox, or you can access the document from the chat box, and that will direct you to the links to use to go to one of 3 concurrent breakout sessions. The VSO and Africa Youth Movement session will start as soon as I close this room, so I'm going to do that now so we can transition. But please stay in touch with us, and thank you so much again to everybody for joining us for today's conversation.